This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and we have a Philco Ford portable solid state stereo phonograph torn apart on the bench because it has a dead right channel. Here is the amplifier. I could not work on this amplifier with it inside the record player because of all these wires that were limiting me from moving the circuit board out where I could work on it. And then I was cussing Philco because they chose not to make everything unpluggable, so I had to unsolder all the wires here, and here I made me a diagram of where they all go when we get ready to put it back together. Now, looking at the amplifier, this is one of those that's driven directly off of the AC power line, and it uses 3 transistors per channel. As I was saying, I suspect our problem is going to be possibly one of these open electrolytic caps or one of these dome epoxy style transistors that are bad about failing. But before we get into that, I'll give you a little update on the personal stuff that's been going on around here. You might recall I think it was the last video, I told you that my mother had been ill. Well, I hate to report that she passed away this past Sunday, and I'm going to tell you her story for one reason only. If maybe one young person can hear this and not go down the same path that she and I know many others did, then it'll be worth telling the story. So, she started smoking cigarettes when she was about 11 or 12, like so many people did, and then as she became an adult she smoked more. In fact, it got to the point she was smoking 2 or 3 packs a day, and then she was drinking Diet Mountain Dews. In fact, at one point she was drinking 2 to 3 2-liter bottles per day. That's right, you heard me correct, 2 to 3 2-liter bottles per day. Now, in recent months she had cut back on that some, but I'm afraid by then the damage was done. Well, in 2014 she was diagnosed with COPD and an enlarged heart, and the doctor told her at that time, if you can put the cigarettes down and if you can put the Diet Mountain Dews down and take these medications, I think you've got a pretty good shot at living a somewhat normal life, and you might even be able to come off of some of the medications. Well, unfortunately she didn't put the cigarettes or the drinks down, and at one point she stopped taking the medications because she claimed they cost too much and they weren't doing anything for her. Well, that rocked on a little while until she got shingles, and then she went to one of the local clinics for that, and they listened to her heart and told her that she needed to see a cardiologist immediately, if not sooner. So they hooked her up with one that she got along with, and they got her back on her pills, and her heart started doing better, and it's starting to miss, so I may have to table this for a little while. But as I was saying, they got her back on her pills, and her heart improved and her overall health improved. Now, she couldn't do what she did whenever she was 30, but it could have been a whole lot worse, and honestly I think she was wanting to do what she did when she was 30, and when the pills didn't provide that, then she got discouraged. So fast forward to about November of 2022, and she decided she was going to stop taking her medicine again. My mother's insurance, she fell into what they call a donut hole, and during the last 3 months of the year her prescriptions skyrocketed in price. Of course, the monthly premium she was paying didn't go down any, but the amount she had to pay for the prescriptions went up drastically during that last 3 months of the year, and that's when she blew a gasket and said, no more of this. When my prescriptions run out, I'm done. I'm not taking this crap anymore. And she told a retired nurse friend of hers that, and the nurse friend told her, if you stop taking those pills, you're going to find out just exactly what they were doing for you. But by about late November, early December, I could tell that things were really taking a nosedive. She had no energy. She wasn't eating right. She was vomiting. She was hurting really bad in her side, which we both thought the vomiting and the pain in her side was due to her gallbladder, but she still would not go to a doctor. So this rocked on for most of December, and it all came to a head on Christmas Eve when she ate some crackers and cheese and something hit her and she was in excruciating pain in her side, and she told me to call her an ambulance, so I did. And she would not let the paramedics touch her as far as putting her on the stretcher. She didn't really want me touching her either, but I was pretending like I didn't hear all the protest. I just grabbed her and lifted her up and put her on the stretcher, and they took her to the hospital. And I thought that night, well, they'll go in and do the gallbladder surgery, get her back on her heart medication, and she'll be back home in a week or two. Well, it didn't work out that way. That was on a Saturday night when she went in the hospital. It was Monday morning before they finally got her out of emergency into a regular room. Or actually, it was a room on the telemetry floor. And it was at that point when she started talking out of her head. And that sort of behavior went on for the duration, you know, accusing me of things I didn't do, seeing things that weren't there, etc., etc. Well, the surgeon told her that she needed her gallbladder removed, but she was probably too weak to survive the surgery. Well, Friday of that week, they finally did the surgery, and she survived. And then she was in the hospital a few more days, and then after that, they released her to a nursing home / swing bed facility. And the plan was to put her on swing bed status for 20 days to try to rehab her. And if she wasn't better after that, then she would go on permanent long-term nursing home status. Well, she was in the swing bed 4 days, and they called me at home and said that she had pneumonia and they were taking her back to the hospital. Well, as you might imagine, pneumonia and COPD is not a good combination. Well, she was in the hospital the second go-round for 2 weeks, and during this time, well, let me back up. During the first go-around in the hospital, they told her kidneys were about shot. Not to the point of needing dialysis, but pretty darn close. And whenever she was in there for pneumonia, towards the end of them releasing her that time, they called to tell me that there was blood in her stool and they needed to give her a transfusion, which I agreed to. They told me they would eventually need to do a scope to find out where the bleeding was coming from, but she wasn't in any condition for that at this time. So they released her from the hospital after 2 weeks when she was in there for the pneumonia, and then they sent her to I think you call it an acute care hospital. It basically has the same thing as a regular hospital, except they also do rehab more extensively than they do at a regular hospital. So she was in there, and she would not eat, she would not work with physical therapy, and things just kept getting worse and worse. I went up there on a Monday, and all I could get her to consume was some Diet Mountain Dew, and that was it. And they told me she needed more blood, so I told them, give her blood. That perked her up a little bit, but not a whole lot. Well, that Monday, we also went to the nursing home to visit a friend of mine, and when I got up Wednesday morning, I was not feeling well, and I tested myself for COVID and came back positive. And I thought to myself, out of all the times I could have caught COVID during this past 3 years and it didn't happen, and the time when I absolutely do not need to get it is when I come down with it. So that was on a Wednesday. That day they called to tell me that she was not eating and we were going to have to do something quick. They asked if they could insert a feeding tube, and I said, well, I've got mixed emotions about that because I know she wouldn't want that. And they said, well, the only glimmer of hope that she has is if we can get some nutrients in her. So I told them to try it. Well, they tried it, and unfortunately they were unable to insert the feeding tube, and at that point the doctor recommended that she be placed on comfort measures only. And for those of you that don't know, that's when we switch from, but that's where we switch. Dadgum, these planes. Anyway, as I was saying, that's where we switch from treatment designed to cure to simply treatment designed to keep somebody as comfortable as possible for generally the short amount of time they have left on this earth. So I told them about my COVID situation, and they, of course, they didn't really want me up there with that. And you know, my original game plan was to start going up there during lunchtime and feeding and trying to feed her myself, because I've just got the idea that these hospitals and such, they don't help the patients eat. They just bring the tray in and sit it there, and if the patient's able to eat, fine. If they ain't, then too bad, you know. And I had it in my head that maybe if I go up there and help feed her, then maybe she can get some nutrients in her and get stronger. But you know, since the COVID thing threw a cog in the wheel, I couldn't do that. So all I could do was just call the hospital several times a day to check on her. Well, Saturday night I called up there, and they said her vital signs were about the same, but they could tell she was getting weaker. The nurse asked me how my COVID situation was doing, and I said I feel better, but I don't think I'm fully out of it yet. And she said, well, I think what you need to do tomorrow, if you feel led to do so, is put on a mask and come up here and see her. And so I said, well, that's what I'll do then. So I called a friend of mine that's been giving me a ride. Visiting hours start at 10. She said, I'll pick you up about 9:45 in the morning, and I'll take you up there to visit with your mother. You know, even though I knew there was nothing I could do about it, the thought of her dying up there alone just really hurt me. So I got up Sunday morning, was getting ready to go. About 8:20 in the morning, they called from the hospital and said that she had passed away. And of course you can imagine what that did to me, because I wasn't able to get up there and say goodbye before she left. So we went up there to one last time, and I asked the nurse, you know, please tell me that she passed away peacefully, and you know, the nurse assured me that she did. And you know, I don't know what really went on. I wasn't there, but if the nurse told me that she passed away peacefully, then that's what we're going to have to go with. And you know, that does give me some degree of comfort. So what I'm trying to tell you young people is, you know, you think it's cool when you're 15 or 16 to be drinking and smoking and doing all this, but you know, it will catch up with you one day, and it'll happen a lot quicker than you think. I realize when you're a teenager, 30 or 40 or 50 years down the line might seem like an eternity away, but it's really not. It's like whenever I was 18, 40 seemed like an eternity away, and it got here a lot quicker than I figured it would. And so, you know, you keep on smoking and drinking and doing all that, one day you're going to wake up in the same boat that my mother was in, and it's not going to be pleasant. It's going to be a very, very painful experience. So, you know, best just not to go down that road and hopefully live a better more productive life. You know, I figure had my mother not gone down that road, she'd have probably lived another 20 years. But, you know, only God knows that, you know, for sure. But we know the smoking and all that certainly didn't help anything. But I still feel like I've got some symptoms left from the COVID ordeal. I honestly don't even feel like messing with any of this stuff. The only reason I'm messing with this is so I won't be vegetating in the recliner. This past 6 weeks I've pretty much done nothing but either sit in front of the computer on Facebook or vegetate in the recliner in front of the television. I've probably watched more TV in the past 6 weeks than I've watched in the past 20 years. So, and I know I can't keep going on like that. So even if it means me having to force myself to do something, then that's what we're going to do. Alright, so if my story convinced some young person to not go down that wrong path, then it was worth telling. So now let's try to figure out why this amplifier is misbehaving. Alright, I think I found the problem. The red B+ input lead to this transformer was not soldered well. It was literally wiggling whenever I moved it, so that was a factory defect, so I resoldered it, and hopefully now we'll have audio out of both channels. These 3 small electrolytic capacitors, they didn't check open, but they did read higher than normal as far as the capacitance value. Now that wouldn't keep the signal from passing through, but I went ahead and changed them anyway. And then this capacitor here, the isolation capacitor for the record changer, was leaky, so I went ahead and replaced that. So I'm about ready to stick this back in the box and see what happens. I did meter some of the resistors, and some checked a little bit out of whack, but nothing bad enough that I'm going to replace them. I'm not aiming to do a full restoration on this today. Well, so much for that. So much for a simple repair. Get it all back in here and it's still dead on the right channel. As you can tell, not a darn thing on the right channel. I need to have this out where I can troubleshoot it under live circuit conditions, but with all these wires being so short, it's not very conducive to pulling it out where I can work on it. So I could disconnect everything and use clip leads, but quite frankly, I really don't want to do all that all over again. For a little bit, I'd be tempted just to put it on the Facebook baby clothes and cell phone pages and old record player, $15, and be done with it. And if anybody says anything about it only playing out of one speaker, I'll just tell them, well, it's pushing 60 years old. You're doing good. It plays out of even one speaker. So deal with it. Alright, it's now time to do some live troubleshooting. So we had the meter set to measure DC volts, and I'm going to start at our audio output stage and work our way back. So the first thing I want to see is do we have any B+ voltage going through the primary of the audio output transformer. Yeah, a whopping 0.15 volts. So we're not getting any B+ through this audio output transformer. So now we need to find out why. And this heat sink on the good channel is warm, while this one over here is cool as a cucumber, which makes perfect sense, because if there's no B+ voltage, then nothing's going to happen. Alright, so let's trace this out. This shouldn't be too difficult here. Alright, 130 volts, that's good. Alright, so let's trace this over right here to this point. And what do we have? we have 0.16 volts. So apparently this foil has a break in it somewhere, so we may just have to fix that by running a piece of hookup wire from point A to point B. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is resolder these points here between this point and this point, and if that doesn't solve the problem, then we'll just have to run a piece of hookup wire from here to here, and that should get us back in business. Alright, that still didn't give us continuity, so we're just going to have to put a piece of hookup wire from here to over here, and that ought to take care of it. Alright, there's our jumper in place, and we'll now power it up, and I feel like it'll work. And that did it. Now, the audio is a bit weak, but I don't think that's an amp problem. I think this cartridge has been replaced at some point, and I feel like they probably used one that was of lower output than what was in it. The original was probably a 3-volt crystal, and this one's probably a 1-volt, but I'm not really going to worry about that. It's loud enough for me to hear, and if I want to get it any louder, I'll just have to build a preamp stage at a later date. Now, I need to do a little work on the changer. The size selector is stuck, so I got to pull this off and see if I can get that unstuck. Alright, I removed the size selector sensor, and the problem is this piece right here is stuck, so I'm going to have to remove this clip and take it apart and clean it and put a drop of oil on it, and that should get the record size sensor to work properly. And it looks like I am going to have to heat this with a soldering iron to get it unstuck. It just will not come off any other way there. Alright, I got it freed up, so let's reinsert it back in the record changer, which can be a little bit tricky, and then we'll see if it will automatically size select now. Alright, let's see. Alright, we need to adjust the tone arm set down, and we need to adjust the height. Alright, this screw here is the tone arm height. Turn it clockwise to raise the height of the tone arm, and then there's a screw under here that sets the tone arm set down position. So let's see. Probably raised it a little bit too high. And we got some grease here that's keeping the function lever from moving to the shut off position. But before we deal with that, let's check and see if the other two sizes index correctly. Alright, that's good. Alright, now we got a 10-inch record.
If you loving me like I'm loving you, baby, we're really in love.
Okay, just go out of focus, why don't you? Alright, I did down and dirty basic service on this. I opted not to tear this thing completely apart and clean it and re-lubricate it. I just did just enough to hopefully get it working right. And I see I'm going to have to adjust the heights of the set down screw a little bit again. Okay, that's good. And now it's set too far in on 45s. We're just going to have to get it compromised to where it's, because some records, you know, are just not going to land right because of the way they were made in the first place. Let's try it again. Of course not. Alright, that's better. Finally, let's check a 12-inch 33. Alright, good. Yeah, it tends to skip on these newer records that are bass intensive. And that's just simply because these older ceramic cartridges, crystal cartridges, whatever this happens to be, they're just not compliant enough to play later stereo records. This record here is about 12 or 13 years newer than the record player, so now the only way you could get around that would be to install a newer type ceramic cartridge and build a preamp stage, but I'm not going to all that trouble right now. Yeah, of course it goes without saying, this probably wouldn't do too well if you bought new records at Walmart or Books A Million or wherever and tried to play them on this. They'd probably skip all over the place, but older records that were made during the time that this record player was made would probably do okay. Alright, there you go. I've about resurrected this one about as much as it's gonna get resurrected, and it does pretty good for what it is. Alright, good deal. Alright, hope you got something out of this, and more to come later. You know, while reviewing some of my footage, I thought I'd get on my soapbox for a minute. And excuse me if I start coughing. I've still got that lingering COVID cough that just don't want to turn loose. But whenever they took my mother to that nursing home / swing bed facility, one of the first things they did was shove a Medicaid application in my face in case she had to go to long-term care. There'd be somebody to pay the bill, and at over $8,000 a month, we certainly can't afford it, and frankly I don't know of anybody who can. If somebody is well off, they won't be well off for long at those prices. So I filled out the application, she turned it in, and I figured, well, this might actually go smoothly. Well, wrong. Within a few days, I got a letter from the local Medicaid office wanting a sit-down meeting with me, and I thought to myself, what could they possibly want? I told them I answered all the questions on the application. What more do they want to know? Well, actually, they wanted to know a lot more. It seems they do a 5-year look-back period to make sure hadn't anybody transferred any assets or anything like that. And you would not believe some of the questions she was asking me. A lot of them, in my opinion, were none of their business. And where the rub came in, and I'm telling you this to where you might want to think about this if you're planning on doing the same thing, what I'm about to describe has its pros and it has its cons. But years ago, I added my mother's name to my checking account, and she added my name to hers. In case something happened to either one of us, the other one would have easy access to the money, but we did not share money, you know. what was in my bank account was mine, what was in hers was hers, and that's the way it was, except for the names. Well, not only did they want to take her bank account to go towards the nursing home, they also wanted to take my income as well. And I tried to explain to them until I was blue in the face. I'd have done better off talking to a brick wall. And then they'd want me to go to the bank and get something, and I'd jump through hoops to get whatever it was they wanted and take it back to them. And then they'd decide, oh no, we need something else. That's not enough. And then I'd jump through hoops to get whatever it was that they wanted. And it was, oh no, we've decided that's not enough. We need something else. And I just finally told them, look, she's in a rehab facility, and they're supposed to be rehabbing her. Hopefully she'll come home so you can take that Medicaid application and stick it in the garbage. I wanted to tell them they could take it and shove it up there, but I figured I'd better not say that. But what really burns me up about that is we send all these billions of dollars and weapons to all these foreign countries that wouldn't give us the time of day if our life depended on it, and we have all these illegal aliens coming over here that we give everything in a bag of chips to without any kind of hassle. But then you have people like us who legitimately need the help and get treated like some kind of trash for even thinking about asking for it. In fact, Medicaid, I was looking for them at any given time to want to bring the backhoe over here and dig up the backyard to make sure there wasn't any money buried back there. So, you know, with that said, I just hope that none of you have to deal with Medicaid, you know, when it comes time to make decisions for a ill loved one, etc., etc. Because if you have to deal with them, you're probably going to be in pretty bad shape when it's done. Because, you know, when we're in a position like I was in here these past few weeks, you know, families already have enough on their plate dealing with a ill loved one as it is. They don't need a lot of red tape and bureaucracy added to an already overflowing plate. That just does not need to happen. You know, I realize they have to protect themselves against fraud, but all this bureaucratic nonsense does not need to happen. If somebody needs help, you help them, and that's just the bottom line. And as far as insurance goes, I remember a time when if you needed medication or if you needed a medical procedure, they paid for it. It wasn't none of this copay and deductible and we'll pay for this but we won't pay for that. You know, it wasn't none of that nonsense. And if I'm paying equal premiums for 12 months out of the year, then I ought to get equal coverage during that 12 months out of the year. There shouldn't be no 3-month donut hole where your prescriptions cost a absurd amount. It's like my mother said not long before she went in the hospital. Even with the insurance, you can't afford to pay for your medicine because it costs too much. So, you know, that's my little rant for today. You know, I just, you know, the whole thing just makes me want to throw up. But there's a lot that needs to be changed when it comes to medical care, prescription drugs, prescription drug coverage, Medicaid, etc., etc. And there's a lot more I could say on the subject, but I would like to keep my YouTube account, and I'm afraid if I say too much more, I'm going to go overboard. So we're going to call it a night right now, and I hope you got something out of this video. And whenever I'm in a better frame of mind, I don't know when that'll be, then we'll try to work on some more interesting stuff. Like I said, the only reason I even messed with this record player was to get me out of the recliner for a little while. But hopefully over time, you know, things will get better, and you know, we can get back to doing some things. So y'all take it easy, and hopefully more to come later.